Well, hello everybody, and happy Tuesday. It's been a while since I made a video on this channel, but I wanted to come at you with a brand new video, and we're going to be focusing today specifically on what has now been named Tropical Depression 13 out here in the Atlantic. If you remember, over the last week, we've been referring to this system as Invest 95L, but as of the time of this video, this system has been officially named Tropical Depression 13, and we are expecting some intensification with this system as it continues on its track throughout the Atlantic. We're going to be talking about that and its implications on the lower 48 potentially as we get into late into the week and into early next week. Like I said, we'll get into all that during this video, so if you do enjoy today's video, be sure to like, subscribe, share with family and friends who will be impacted potentially by this system as we get into this time period. And with that, let's get right into the video. Alright, so let's just get right into it. So this is the latest GO-16 infrared satellite showing what is now Tropical Depression 13 as it continues to make its way west-northwest through the Atlantic Ocean. Right now, it's currently in the central Atlantic, and for those of you that have been paying attention to this system, the one thing I want you to note is compare what we saw yesterday to today. If I was to show you what was Invest 95L yesterday, a lot of this convection we're seeing was pretty scattered all about, right? All throughout portions of the low. It wasn't really consolidating very well. But if we contrast that to what we're seeing today, a lot more consolidation around the center of the low, which is now Tropical Depression 13. The only thing to note, though, is that a lot of these outer bands of convection are still trying to get their act together, as you can see here by these cloud tops. You do have some stronger bands of convection, but still relatively centered around the low. Our outer bands really haven't developed quite yet. So that's something that we're going to be looking towards as the system continues to move off towards the west. And as you're going to see here throughout this conversation, this system is certainly cause for concern. And the reason being is because it's going to be going into a much favorable environment of very warm sea surface temperatures, as well as some weakening shear values as well, as we go into the next few days and into later this week, where we are anticipating that the system will eventually become Hurricane Lee. So, I sort of alluded to it at the top of this conversation, but here's the latest sea surface temperatures courtesy of the University of Miami. If we were to denote where Tropical Depression 13 is located right now, it's going to be somewhere within this region of the central Atlantic. What we are expecting, though, is, again, the storm motion is moving to the west-northwest at about 15 to 20 miles per hour. And if we were to draw a vector to show its just general path, you can see that regardless of its trajectory, it still is taking this westward course, which is pretty standard when you have this high pressure system that is helping to steer clockwise flow and steer it towards the west. But regardless of where this goes, if it goes to a little bit more to the north, a little bit more directly to the west, we are expecting that it's going to be moving into some very volatile conditions. Again, these sea surface temperatures are near record-breaking in parts of the Atlantic, and we've been talking about the Gulf of Mexico as well. Although not part of our conversation, we've saw that both the Gulf and the Atlantic have had some very warm sea surface temperatures, record-breaking in the 174-year history of keeping track of these things. So if we're just looking at the sea surface temperature and not even taking into account the wind shear values or any other of these variables that can impact the development of this system, we can see that these temperatures are really hot, and it's going to be going into a much favorable environment according to this map. And if we're looking just at sea surface temperatures, we could surely expect that as it goes into warmer waters to see some rapid intensification going into the next couple of days. Here's another look at that, by the way. This is courtesy of Tropical Tidbits, and it gives you more of a specific Celsius value. And I think this map really highlights it even better than the University of Miami. I do like the University of Miami map, but what I mean by that is it does give me specific values for our general temperature swath in terms of Celsius. And again, our system is out towards the central Atlantic. It's continuing to move off in this west-northwest direction. And look what's downstream of that. Very warm temperatures out in the Gulf and the Atlantic, especially out towards the Atlantic, well past our leeward islands. So This is something to watch very closely. This is certainly when we talk about intensification of any tropical system, and I know folks that live in the mid-Atlantic, that are down in Florida, the Gulf, this is music to your ears, right? I mean, you've heard this before. It's almost as if it's a broken record. Anytime a tropical system interacts with very hot sea surface temperatures, that really can be a catalyst to rapid development and intensification as it goes into that more favorable parameter space. But the other thing that we have to consider too, of course, is the overall jet stream, right? We sort of talked about this as well at the beginning of the conversation, somewhat alluded to it, but this is taking a look at the 500 millibar jet. You can see very modest easterly flow coming off of Africa, which is really helping to steer the system and develop it in favorable conditions, although, as we've mentioned, the much favorable environment is going to be as it continues to move west. But we have more of this easterly flow, but if we look more towards the north and west, you sort of have this low pressure system that's moving off of the northeast. That's going to continue to move off to the east-northeast, and with that, we should actually see this system continue its west-northwest trajectory as it moves its way into the Leeward Islands by the end of this week. The biggest question mark right now is going to be how this is going to impact the lower 48. If we were to go beyond this weekend, as we expect this to eventually become Hurricane Lee by the end of the week, a lot of questions remain on what our jet pattern is back towards the lower 48. This is going to be really the driving force behind if we see a landfall or not. And I will say this, if we look at our 500 millibar jet, which is our mid-level jet or our jet stream, we have a lot in the way of meridional flow. You have sort of this ridge, trough, ridge pattern. And whenever we see that, right, we could anticipate that we might see a shortwave trough feature come off of the west coast and provide enough jet flow to possibly steer this system away from the coast. The problem is, at least as of right now, is we don't really know what's going to happen with our weather pattern beyond, say, this weekend. We know that there could potentially be some jet flow that cuts right through the center of the United States, but the question really is at the moment is what essentially happens with that jet stream pattern. When you go beyond, say, 120 to 150 hours out, our weather models like to make a lot of assumptions on things that aren't present yet. So that is a huge question mark going forward. I think you'll find that we're very confident as forecasters, especially the National Hurricane Center is confident on this system becoming a hurricane in the next few days. Very high confidence in that, in fact. But the biggest question is, even if we get a hurricane to develop, is it going to make landfall? We're going to talk about that towards the end of the conversation. There's going to be a nice little spaghetti plot for you, and I'll have chapters within this video where you can skip around and take a look at different products if need be. But that really is the question mark right now. It's not a matter of its development as much as it is its placement. And again, we're going to talk about that here throughout the video. The other metric that we have to take a look at, though, is wind shear. Remember, it's not just sea surface temperatures. It's not just overall synoptic scale weather patterns in the lower 48 that steer this thing, but it's also the wind shear. We're going to start first with the GFS interpretation. And as you can see, GFS is very bullish on this system becoming a major hurricane by the end of this week into the weekend. Keep in mind, though, as to why. Remember, we have very hot sea surface temperatures downstream of this thing, but also we need to have weak wind shear because strong wind shear can tear this thing apart, and these storms don't like that. They want to be able to continue to intensify without any interference or any perturbations. So what we're seeing here on the GFS is a weakening of wind shear across the Leeward Islands and points westward as we get back towards Florida. And that's going to really aid in the development of things, not just the sea surface temperatures, but also the weakening of your wind shear. As it continues to move west-northwest over time, by the time we get to September 10th, we will see this system eventually be a hurricane, strength, of course, to be determined, but in an environment that's favorable for continued development. Now, the GFS is very bullish, showing a 938. You're going to find here that if we look at the Euro interpretation, a little bit more on the conservative side with the strength of our system. You'll notice, though, a very similar pattern, though, right? It's going to take advantage of these warm sea surface temperatures, and look, just like we talked about on the GFS, very weak wind shear out ahead of this thing, and the Euro is showing this system eventually developing into a hurricane as well. That being said, the euro is a little bit more conservative, showing a 971, as opposed to the GFS showing more like a 935. The GFS sometimes can be a little bit more aggressive with our tropical system, so we have to keep that in mind. But you're going to see that the general trend is that we are seeing high confidence in this developing into a hurricane because of the conditions that we have outlined and the environment that it's going to go into throughout the next few days. So this is the latest from the National Hurricane Center. This advisory came out as of the time of this video, and we are expecting, at least from the National Hurricane Center's point of view, it to develop into a hurricane by some point Wednesday night into probably Thursday morning and into Thursday evening. I would probably put this around Thursday morning and evening that we do see this eventually become a hurricane. It hasn't even been named a tropical storm yet, so we haven't even reached that benchmark. Again, it's still currently a tropical depression. So based on this chart, I would concur with the National Hurricane Center in saying that this is likely to be a hurricane by the time we get into Thursday. Could happen earlier, but I would really say on the more conservative end that Thursday is a pretty realistic time frame for this to reach hurricane threshold. But as we get into the weekend, at least with this cone, you can see with our cone of uncertainty, the National Hurricane Center is anticipating that this becomes a major hurricane by the time it gets towards the Leeward Islands and near the Dominican Republic. Beyond this point, as we look at our spaghetti model here in just a moment, you're going to see that there's a ton of uncertainty with where this places beyond the weekend as we get into early in the middle of next week. So this is the latest. It is anticipated to be a major hurricane towards the weekend. It's going to a very, very favorable environment. That has been the theme of this video all throughout. And so me personally as a forecaster, I would certainly concur with the National Hurricane Center's assessment on this. Keep in mind one other thing. We have not yet sent out a recon mission on this. I don't know when exactly that's going to happen, but be sure that that's going to happen. I would anticipate that maybe by the weekend, as it gets towards Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, and the Leeward Islands, that we may see a recon mission come out there and provide a dropson data. Just know that eventually, once this thing goes major, wouldn't be surprised to see a recon mission as it becomes near that hurricane status towards the weekend. That's going to provide us some really useful data. We do have buoys out here. We do have ships that carry freight that have measurements that record this system as it continues to move westward. But I think you guys can agree that these recon missions that NOAA does really do help to provide much more clarity than what buoy instruments can do. So that's going to certainly help to provide corrections with our weather models as far as the pathing is concerned beyond the weekend and to provide some more clarity. So this forecast, we're going to keep tabs on it, but just know that as we get into this weekend, we should have a lot more substantial resolving, so to speak, of our weather models as those recon missions are likely sent out and we get more of that data fed into the models. So we'll have to keep a close eye on that storyline. But lastly, here is our spaghetti plot, okay? And as you can tell, right, there is a lot in the way of variability. This was taken as of September the 5th at 6Z. You notice, though, that there's a relatively decent spread as we get past the Leeward Islands into the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. The problem is, though, beyond that point, look at our spread. I mean, there is a general trend towards it taking more of this northeasterly turn that would likely have to do with some sort of troughing feature that makes its way through the eastern half of the United States that would substantially steer this thing. You do still have a couple of outlier solutions that are pointing towards an Atlantic landfall near the Carolinas and the mid-Atlantic. But keep in mind, even though there's general consensus of this thing steering to the north and east, there still is a lot of variability beyond Sunday that can happen. It's all going to really depend on our jet stream pattern back towards the lower 48. So you're going to want to stay tuned to this video. Again, folks in the mid-Atlantic, along the eastern seaboard, especially for our friends in the Atlantic side of Florida even, you want to certainly keep tabs on this. Be sure to like and subscribe this video, share with family and friends that may possibly need to keep close tabs on this system as we get through the latter half of this week into early next week. We'll be providing you daily updates on this system as well as other activity in the tropics over the next several days. So thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and we will see you on the next video.